Nairobi, Kenya's vibrant capital, was recently shaken by a wave of protests. Thousands took to the streets, expressing their anger and frustration with the government, the air filled with chants, songs, and the acrid smell of tear gas. These demonstrations were not a sudden outburst, but a boiling over of simmering tensions. The protests brought parts of the city to a standstill. Businesses closed their doors, fearing looting or damage. Traffic snarled, with major roads blocked by protesters and police barricades. Images of burning tires and confrontations with police dominated news headlines, painting a picture of a city on edge. The situation in Nairobi serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace. It highlights the critical need for dialogue and understanding between citizens and their government. The world watches, hoping for a peaceful resolution and a brighter future for this dynamic African city. At the heart of the Nairobi protests lies a deep economic frustration. The cost of living has skyrocketed in recent months, making daily survival a struggle for many Kenyans. The prices of basic commodities like food and fuel have soared, hitting the poorest citizens the hardest. The Kenyan government's decision to raise taxes added fuel to the fire. Many view these tax hikes as insensitive and ill-timed, coming at a time when people are already struggling to make ends meet. The protests, therefore, are a cry for economic justice. The anger is palpable, and the demands are clear. Kenyans want relief. They want their government to address the rising cost of living and provide economic opportunities that allow them to live with dignity. The protests are a stark reminder that economic hardship can quickly escalate into social unrest. The Kenyan police force responded to the protests with force. Armed with tear gas, batons, and water cannons, they attempted to disperse the crowds. Videos emerged on social media showing officers using excessive force, beating protesters and firing tear gas into peaceful gatherings. The use of tear gas, a chemical irritant, has drawn sharp criticism from human rights groups. They argue that its indiscriminate use violates the right to peaceful assembly. Medical professionals have also raised concerns about the potential health risks of tear gas, especially for children and people with respiratory problems. The heavy-handed response from the police has only served to escalate the situation. It has deepened the mistrust between the government and the people, making dialogue and peaceful resolution even more difficult. The use of tear gas in Nairobi has had a significant impact on the city and its residents. The gas, which causes burning sensations in the eyes, nose, and throat, has made it difficult for people to breathe and move freely. Many have sought medical attention for respiratory problems, skin irritation, and panic attacks. The impact extends beyond the immediate physical discomfort. Businesses have been forced to close due to the tear gas, resulting in lost income and productivity. The disruption caused by the gas has also affected access to essential services, such as healthcare and transportation. The widespread use of tear gas has created a climate of fear and anxiety in Nairobi. The inability to breathe freely, the burning sensation in their eyes, the fear of police brutality. These are the realities that many Nairobi residents have had to face. The situation highlights the urgent need for alternative, less harmful methods of crowd control. Section 5. Echoes of the Past. Protests and state response in Kenya. The recent protests in Nairobi are not isolated incidents. Kenya has a long and complex history of protests and state response. From the fight for independence to the struggle for multi-party democracy, Kenyans have often taken to the streets to demand their rights and hold their leaders accountable. However, these protests have often been met with a heavy-handed response from the government. The use of excessive force, arbitrary arrests, and restrictions on freedom of assembly have been recurring themes in Kenya's post-independence history. The current situation in Nairobi echoes these historical patterns. It underscores the ongoing tension between the Kenyan government and its people, particularly regarding the exercise of fundamental freedoms. Understanding this historical context is crucial for comprehending the current unrest and finding a way forward. Section 6. The economic toll businesses caught in the crossfire. The protests in Nairobi have had a significant impact on the city's economy. Businesses, both large and small, have been caught in the crossfire. Many have been forced to close their doors due to the unrest, resulting in lost revenue and disruption to operations. The tourism industry, a vital sector of the Kenyan economy, has been particularly hard hit. The images of protests and tear gas have deterred tourists, leading to cancellations and a decline in bookings. This has had a ripple effect on hotels, restaurants, and other businesses that rely on tourism. The economic fallout from the protests is a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of social and economic stability. When social unrest disrupts daily life and business operations, it has a direct and often devastating impact on the livelihoods of millions. Section 7. A divided city perspectives on the protests. The protests in Nairobi have exposed deep divisions within Kenyan society. While many support the protests and sympathize with the grievances of the demonstrators, others view them as disruptive and counterproductive. This division cuts across ethnic, social, and economic lines. Some argue that the protests are a necessary response to government inaction on critical issues like the cost of living. They believe that peaceful assembly and the right to protest are fundamental pillars of a democratic society. Others, however, condemn the protests, arguing that they are detrimental to the country's stability and economic well-being. They believe that dialogue and engagement through established channels are the most effective ways to address grievances. This division of opinions underscores the complexity of the situation and the need for nuanced understanding. Section 8. The International Eye, Global Reactions and Concerns. The protests in Nairobi have not gone unnoticed by the international community. Governments and human rights organizations around the world have expressed concerns about the situation, particularly the use of force by the Kenyan police. The United States, a key ally of Kenya, has called for restraint and urged all parties to engage in dialogue. The European Union has also issued a statement urging the Kenyan authorities to respect the right to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. The international attention on the situation in Nairobi puts pressure on the Kenyan government to address the underlying issues driving the protests. It also highlights the importance of upholding human rights and democratic principles even in the face of dissent. Section 9. Finding a way forward calls for dialogue and change. As the dust settles from the recent protests, the question on everyone's mind is, what next? There is a growing consensus that a peaceful resolution requires open and honest dialogue between the government and its people. Civil society organizations, religious leaders, and influential figures are calling for a de-escalation of tensions and a commitment to addressing the root causes of the unrest. They emphasize the need for inclusive dialogue that includes representatives from all segments of society, including the protesters. Finding a sustainable solution will require addressing the economic anxieties fueling the protests. This includes tackling the rising cost of living, creating employment opportunities, and ensuring that economic growth benefits all Kenyans, not just a select few. Section 10. An uncertain future. What next for Nairobi? The recent protests in Nairobi serve as a stark reminder of the challenges facing Kenya and many other nations around the world. The protests have exposed deep-seated grievances, economic anxieties, and a growing mistrust between citizens and their government. The path forward remains uncertain. Will the Kenyan government heed the calls for dialogue and implement meaningful reforms? Or will the country slide further into division and unrest? The world is watching, hoping that Kenya, a beacon of democracy and progress in East Africa, can overcome these challenges and build a more just and equitable society for all its citizens. The future of Nairobi, and indeed of Kenya, hangs in the balance.